our baby Isaac was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and needed surgery for a tumor that took up half his abdomen. His odds were the flip of a coin. But at Seattle Children's, he had one of the most experienced pediatric cancer surgical teams in the nation, and they brought him back to 100% himself. Maybe 200%.
For kids with the most complex surgical cases, it's not about beating the odds, it's about changing them. Find your hope at seattlechildrens.org.
Did our consultation with Seattle Nanny, and then we hired the first one that we met. So that wasn't my intent by any means, but we were just really impressed with her. I think I did meet with one after her just because I was like, let's make Seattle Nanny do their job.
For sure.
But yeah, and then Isabel was interviewing other places and we didn't want to let her go. So it wasn't a long process for us.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Elaine Sulkin, and I'm the publisher and CEO at ParentMap. Thank you so much for joining us today for our ParentEd talk, Becoming Aware, Reducing Anxiety and Cultivating Calm, with our friend, author, and Mindsight Institute Executive Director, Dr. Dan Siegel. For those of you not familiar with ParentMap, just like our parenting media partners today across the country who have joined us, it's our business to build inclusive communities that inform, engage, and inspire parents like you and your family while hopefully having a lot of fun too. We're all extremely focused on how to better serve families, and being the parents and publishers that we are, we never settle for the status quo. So it means that our deep community connections, family advocacy, and unique partnerships allow us to build a better village for families. Before we begin, we just want to cover a couple housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded so that everyone who registered can watch it at their leisure and also for educational usage. So if you will get that. And then we also invite you to ask questions and use the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen so that after Dan speaks, we'll do a few minutes of Q&A, and we'd love to get your questions into the queue. So thank you again to our media partners, Baton Rouge Parents, New York Family, and NOLA Family. And then to our event sponsors, Community of Mindful Parenting, Seattle Children's Hospital, Seattle Nanny Network, and Charles Wright Academy. Dr. Siegel is a clinical professor of psychiatry at the UCLA David Geffen School of Medicine, a founding co-director of the UCLA Mindful Awareness Research Center, and executive director of Mindsight Institute. Dr. Siegel is a graduate of Harvard Medical School and is the author of a number of best-selling books, including Brainstorm, Mind, and with Tina Payne Bryson, The Whole Brain Child, and No Drama Discipline. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Dan Siegel. Dan, there he is.
Hello. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Brenna. It's great to be here with all of you. Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Fantastic. Good. Well, I'm so honored to be here with ParentMap. You guys do such fantastic work, and it's always fun and an honor to join you in the mission to help parents. In the hour that we have today, what I'd like to do is introduce you to a way of creating clarity and calm in your life in the face of the wonderful opportunity but understandable challenges that we face as parents. So we walk through life just like I'm on this walking desk because I'm doing so much teaching online since the pandemic. And we need to take care of ourselves, with the word self meaning not just who's in our body, but the relationships that we have with our children, with people we may be co-raising our children with our community, with all of humanity recently being exposed to so much trauma now in the world in so many ways, whether it's locally with issues of racial injustice and the ways in which we are finding people being marginalized, or with the genocides that go on in our world, not just in the Ukraine, but all over our planet. And I'd like to start as the executive director of the Mindsight Institute with what we like to do at our institute, which is to say that we all come with implicit bias, and that our goal is to try to create as much of an inclusive and welcoming learning experience that we can. And so while I may say certain things today, you may find that you feel uncomfortable, or someone else comes to feel uncomfortable or excluded. Please contact Christy at admin@Mindsight Institute and let us know, so that we can always be on a path of being communities of learners and learning from each other, even if we're unaware of the bias that we bring. So that's an invitation I have to join now together in this exploration of what we can do with our mind to actually create a healthier experience in our being parents. So what I'm going to do today is introduce you to a way of thinking about the mind that will empower you to actually strengthen your mind in ways that, if you had mentioned this 25 years ago, even though I'm trained as a scientist and a physician and a psychotherapist in my work as a psychiatrist, I would have said, oh my God, this is not really possible. How can we know these things? But in the last 25 years, we've actually done, as a humanity, careful research to show that what you do with your mind actually can transform the very nature, not only of your relationships, which are so important in parenting, but the health of your body itself. So that when we face the stresses, for example, of the VUCA world we're living in, which is a journalist's translation of a term in the military for the volatile, that's V, U is uncertain, C is complex, and A is ambiguous. The volatile means things change really fast, as we know in this world. Uncertain means we really can't predict exactly what's going to happen, and it gives us a feeling of anxiety when we can't predict. The complex means that a small change that might happen in our community or in the national level or the international level can lead to very large and often difficult to predict outcomes. That's what complex means. And ambiguous means that even if we knew all of the facts, if we read all the newspapers, knew all the facts, we still wouldn't know what they mean. So when we think about these VUCA times, it's hard enough just to be a human being on the planet. But now let's reflect on what it means to be a parent. At least I can say for myself, but this is, I think, true for all of us. One of the deepest things you want to do is protect your child. From the minute your child is born, maybe even the minute you think about them or they're conceived, you want to do things to protect your child's well-being. And part of what the human mind does to protect is try to predict, so that you can know what to do to plan and make sure your child is safe. So VUCA times then are very challenging because it makes it hard to predict anything. So our bodies that we live in as people, as individuals, now in the role of a parent, can start feeling very anxious. Anxious meaning our mind creates its own visions of what's going on and can get very agitated and become stressed. And stress is the physiological response when something meaningful is being thought about or faced. And when stress is converted into distress, meaning you feel overwhelmed, you feel you can't cope, you feel helpless, you feel hopeless, which a lot of us are feeling these days, then even though the body is naturally responding to something that is significant that's happening, like protecting our children, the distress can actually become a disease. It can become a dysfunction in the body that we'll talk about in just a moment. So working with stress and working with anxiety, which is a little different from stress. Anxiety is kind of the way the mind is trying to basically get ready for what might happen, and it creates an anxious state. That's understandable when we're trying to think about what's the future holding for our children. So today's talk is all about how you can really work with anxiety and stress with a practice of training the mind so that you can actually become on a pathway towards being present and clear, so you have this calm that you're able to approach life with. The practice I'll be describing to you is freely available to you on our website, drdansiegel.com. And when you do the practice, you'll find you have a very practical way of applying what I'm going to now go over with you in a conceptual way, so you have that under your belt. The practice takes, 12 minutes is what the research shows is a minimum. This practice takes about 20 minutes, and finding that time to do can be challenging, so we'll talk about that. But you can do that practice over time. And the two main resources for this talk would be the manual called Becoming Aware, which gives you a 21-day program to actually develop this practice. And then the book Aware, if you want to get into a little more detail in what we'll cover today, it teaches you what the practice is actually helping you do. So let me then, actually turn this, there we go. This sound may be a little better. I'll just check with Elaine because I noticed it was as if I was going to play some musical instruments. Good. I noticed somehow my Zoom was on a different thing. So this is good. So you will now get, I hope it's even clearer now. Sorry about that. I just noticed it must be on something to do that. Okay, so let me see if I can show you these slides. And I usually don't show slides, but this will be a nice journey for you to see. Let me just pull this thing up back to here, and let me pull it up here. Here we go. So let's see if I can do this. Here we go. Here, this should work nicely. Okay. Let's see why it's not letting me. Here we go, share. It says screen sharing has failed to start. Please try again later. I don't know why that would be the case, but let me see if we can do that. 1 second, maybe let me get out of this and try just a little technical detail here. This might help. So I'll ask my hosts to see, let's see if we can try it one more time. Let's try it now. There, can you see it now?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so this is a practice that you can incorporate into your parenting approach. It's something that is in these books, Aware and Becoming Aware. It's a practice you can learn to teach kids that Tina Payne Bryson and I teach in, I think it's the Whole Brain Child. There's a version of it you can actually teach kids in a new book that's coming out with Dina Margolin called Now Maps, which is basically taking the wheel and showing you how to teach a child how to use it themselves. And so it's about cultivating calm and clarity in the face of these VUCA times that we're in. So what I'm going to do is walk you through something. I'm going to try to go slowly, even though I'm really excited about sharing it with you, and I want to make sure we cover everything, because some of it, like in this slide, when we say, well, if I'm saying that the way you as a parent are going to cultivate your mind actually will make all the difference in how your parenting turns out. So with Mary Hartzell, I wrote a book called Parenting from the Inside Out, which we wrote based on a textbook, The Developing Mind, which actually Tina Bryson and I write books based on that textbook. But that's the graduate school textbook, especially the 3rd edition if you're a science person and say, oh, show me the science behind this, the developing mind would be your graduate school textbook. You could have 500 pages, thousands of references. It's all there for you. What we're going to go through is just the take-home messages that have practical implication. So the mind is your subjective experience. It's what you feel. The felt texture of life is what we mean by mind. And parents who tune in to the mind of their child have children who develop more emotional and social intelligence. So that's kind of a simple way of thinking about it, is that when you only focus on behavior, your child may be well behaved in quotes, but actually they may not develop the internal compass that is really what gives them emotional and social skills, that give them resilience, for example, and grit. To have a growth mindset, you need to have this awareness of your interior world, which we learn first from our parents. Now, the way you know that is you have consciousness, that little thing on the left there. And all of this is about information processing. Like if I say, hello, that is a symbol that means something. Well, those three facets of mind are commonly talked about in the work that I've been doing for the last 30 years now. We look at the mind as a self-organizing process of a complex system, which has a whole science behind it. But the bottom line is, when you see that the mind is beyond the subjective experience or consciousness of it or information processing, and self-organization is the way a complex system like us regulates its own becoming. So when we say you as a parent can learn to develop calm and clarity in the face of challenges, what we're saying is that you actually can become empowered to cultivate optimal self-organization. And the way you do that is amazingly through a process we're going to name as integration, which is the linking of differentiated parts. And if we add this incredibly simple but powerful finding that integration looks like it's the basis of well-being, that explains every parenting book I've ever written, or even brainstorm for adolescents. That's the simple take-home message, that integration is what we do as parents to cultivate well-being. Now let's talk about how to cultivate that in ourselves. We want to go in this kind of flow that is flexible, adaptive, coherent, energized, and stable. These are the qualities that happen when you have integration. That's the basis of resilience and health. We can describe it with the simple word harmony. And it's kind of like a river where on one bank of the river is rigidity, another bank is chaos. The optimal flow is the flow of integration. That's the faces flow of harmony. So this explains the entire field of mental health. It also explains the entire field, which I'm trained in, attachment research. When we are not integrated, we either go to rigidity or chaos, and that creates in a relationship actually impaired integration in the brain of the child, which makes them prone to either being shut down in rigidity or out of control in chaos. Anyway, it's incredibly simple, but if you read The Developing Mind, you will find all the science behind that simple statement. Now, when you overview the field of contemplative science, which is the study of meditation, basically, you can find, and this term comes from meeting with the leading researchers in the field of mindfulness meditation. They couldn't decide on what mindfulness meditation included. So I offered to them this drawing from my daughter, Dan Siegel. I wanted to call it 3 pillars of mindfulness training. Half of them mindfully disagreed and said, no, you can't do that because mindfulness does not include intention training. So when you look at the research, when you look at training, whether you call it mindfulness or mindfulness and compassion training, whatever you call it, the researchers were happy with this term 3-pillar mind training. You are training attention to be focused so that basically you sustain attention on your chosen object, like the breath, for example. When a distraction comes, you're able to note the distraction. That's a second skill. A third skill is you learn to let the distraction go. And a fourth skill, and these are all different networks in the brain, is to redirect attention to your chosen object of attention. So sustaining, noticing a distraction, letting go of a distraction, refocusing, that's all what we mean by the word focused attention. And focused attention training is beautifully described in a book called Peak Mind by my colleague Amishi Jha, J-H-A, if you want to deep dive into that research. But it's coupled with a second aspect of the training, which is to open up awareness. And people often don't think about this, but it's not just about focusing attention. It's doing something called open monitoring. And I'll get more into that in a big way in just a moment. Open monitoring essentially is this capacity to open up awareness so that instead of being lost in, let's say, frustration with your child because she's not eating her food or he's not brushing his teeth or whatever, he's not studying enough to get into the super elite college you think he needs to get into, all of that stuff would be you getting lost in what you're aware of. But if you had open awareness, you could sit in this space of awareness we'll be talking about and notice your frustration about this or that thing instead of becoming the frustration. It's like the difference between saying, I am sad or I am angry, or I'm feeling sadness and I'm feeling angry. It's creating a bit of a distance from the thing itself. So that's open awareness. And the third pillar is to develop kind intention, which is sometimes called loving compassion or loving kindness. Kindness can be thought of as honoring one another's vulnerability or doing things for each other without expecting anything in return. So you can see that you're training three aspects of the mind, which are attention to be focused, awareness to be open, and intention to be kind. Now, you won't see this anywhere spelled out so specifically, but when you actually call the research and look at it and find the core elements, and this has been validated in the research and peer-reviewed journals, when I presented this to the actual researchers, they were happy with this name, three-pillar mind training. So if you take this idea that this is helpful in some ways, what do we know that says it's helpful? Well, this is from very rigorous research that if you were to do three-pillar mind training in your life, you will reduce stress by reducing the stress hormone cortisol. You'll improve the way your immune system functions, which is a pretty good thing to do during a pandemic. That's amazing. What you do with your mind is reducing stress and optimizing your immune function. Yes, absolutely. You're going to improve your cardiovascular health by reducing risk factors like lowering cholesterol, lowering high blood pressure, and even having your heart communicate with your head in a much more balanced, integrated way. You're actually going to reduce inflammation. And we know now in medicine that inflammation is a key cause of serious, sometimes life-threatening illnesses by changing the way genes are regulated. And yes, that's what the research shows. What you do with your mind actually alters all these molecules of health. And as if those four were not enough, research has shown that three-pillar mind training optimizes an enzyme, also a molecule, that repairs and maintains the ends of your chromosomes called telomeres. And this, all of this, but especially this fifth one, slows the aging process. And when I wrote the book Aware, I sent it to the researchers who had studied this, and they said, Dan, you left something out, you got to put it in. And I said, what did I leave out? And they said, you have to say it slows the aging process. I said, that's kind of audacious. And they said, we've proven it. And one of them, Elizabeth Blackburn, got the Nobel Prize for discovering this system. And three-pillar mind training optimizes your telomerase. So if I said to you, there's a vitamin that did these 5 things, you'd probably take it in a heartbeat. If you had the funds, you'd probably invest in such a company. And what I'm telling you is that you could invest in your own well-being. And these 5 would be enough, I think, to motivate anybody. But if you look at number 6, you actually change the structure and function of the brain to be more integrated. And in 2015, Smith and colleagues showed that an integrated brain is the best predictor of well-being. So this list of 6 outcomes of 3-pillar mind training is the amazing, startling research, rigorously discovered and challenged and established to be true outcomes of 3-pillar mind practice. Now, when you combine the notion that integration is health with the notion that consciousness can create these changes, and what if you say, well, then how do I integrate consciousness? And that led to the creation years ago of a practice around a table. No one wanted to call it the table of awareness, but this is what the table looks like. So it's more like a wheel with an outer rim and an inner hub. And this is a practice we're going to talk about today. And I've done this initially with my patients, then with my students who are therapists. They did it with themselves and then with their clients. And then I started doing workshops and I started recording it because I'm a scientist. I did it with first 10,000 people in person. Then my assistant recently counted up how many people before the pandemic I did the Wheel of Awareness with in person and recorded the survey results, and it was 50,000 people. So this is not an exaggeration. This was actually documented, how many people did the wheel in person in workshops. So we have a lot of very interesting survey results. And what this is basically is you take the energy patterns coming from outside the body in the first segment of the rim, which are the knowns, like what you hear, what you see, what you smell, what you taste, what you touch, energy coming toward your body. And in the metaphor, we put that on the rim or the knowns, and we focus attention to those energy patterns with a singular spoke. And then in the hub, we differentiate all of that known stuff on the rim from the knowing itself, which is called awareness. And once we distinguish the knowing in the hub from the knowns on the rim, we are given the empowerment to actually move that spoke around with intention and with strength. So we move the spoke then to the second segment, which are energy patterns from inside the skin encased body, like the feeling in your muscles, your bones, your organs, like your heart or your lungs, intestines. We explore those. We then differentiate all these rim elements from each other and from the hub. And then we move the spoke over again to the third segment of the rim. And this is the segment that allows us to explore things like emotion and memory, thought, belief, hopes, dreams, longings, desires, beliefs, all of that. Imagine the strength as a parent to be able to identify your hopes and dreams for your child. From what we'll talk about the hub. You then move the spoke over again to talk about a relational sense. We call it the 8th sense. Your sense of connection to your children, to other members of your family, to your friends, to your community, to all of humanity, and even to all of nature. And the most recent book I've just finished called Intra-Connected is about our relational identity like that. Okay, so now what's been very interesting is to see how people respond when you differentiate all these rim elements from each other and from the hub itself. And people with anxiety would have that reduced. People with mild to moderate depression would have that reduced. People facing work on traumatic issues found it very helpful. People who unfortunately had gotten a medical diagnosis that was a terminal diagnosis and were panicking about dying, they found it helpful. So it was clinically a very helpful thing. But for parenting, what really became clear was it allowed you to become more present in ways that I want to really share with you right now. Because presence, if we have our second acronym of the day, we had FACES to start out with. Actually, we started with VUCA, didn't we? So this is the third acronym. I'm sorry if you don't like acronyms. FACES was the flexible, adaptive, coherent, energized, and stable. This is the acronym. The part we play as a parent is we bring presence. And Tina Bryson and I wrote a book called The Power of Showing Up, which is all about presence. Caroline Welch, my partner in life and work, she wrote a beautiful book called The Gift of Presence. It's a mindfulness guide for women that's really exquisite. But the idea of the part we play is we show up, we're present in ways that I'm going to go into a lot of depth with you right now. And then we tune in, meaning we attune focus our attention on the internal nature of a child's experience or our own. Resonance is like the guitar strings. When we connect with other strings on the guitar, we don't become the other strings. So it's not mirroring, it's being changed because of what we're receiving from another. That's resonance. And what happens is then there's a feeling of trust. Now, I'm going to dive quickly through this next part, but with my daughter's help in Aware, there are 100 pages in that book that go over what I'm going to just say in about 3 minutes. But when you make some of the scientific proposals that, again, you can explore in a book called Mind, or the book, The Developing Mind. So there's a lot of science behind what I'm about to say, but I need to summarize this to get to the practical implications. Energy, physicists say, is the movement from possibility to actuality. And when you try to map that out, as Maddie helped me do with these diagrams, let's say there are 1 million words you and I share. So at this moment, there's 1 out of 1 million chance you'll guess what I'm about to say. So in this graph, probability is near 0 at the bottom and 100% at the top. So that's the y-axis on the diagram. Change or clock time would go from left to right on the x-axis of the diagram. And if you don't like math, this is all the math we're going to do today. But the idea here at this moment, you don't know what I'm going to say. Maybe I don't even know what I'm going to say. Because there's one thing I'm going to say out of 1 million, it's not quite 0, but it's near 0. That's how physicists talk about it. But once I say the word ocean, bam, you've seen energy flow. Because it went from possibility to actuality. We've moved from point A to point A1. And then if we go to, let's say, these seas, at some point, let's say the oceans, the seas in the world, you would have there 1 out of 5 named oceans. And then once I say the Pacific Ocean, we've moved up to 1 out of 1. So sometimes you're at a higher place, we call them plateaus, and sometimes you're up at a peak. So the bottom place, though, we call the plane of possibility. So for those of you who remember your physics, this would correlate with, as physicists have confirmed, what's called the quantum vacuum, or the sea of potential. It is basically a mathematical space where all possibilities rest before they turn into actualities. Now, I know that sounds weird, for sure. It's just the physics view of the nature of reality. So what that means then is that you would have different places along that probability curve that one we would call a plane, the bottom, where all the possibilities are sitting. One physicist, Arthur Zions, beautifully calls this the formless source of all form. Then you have plateaus, like if I'm only thinking about the 5 oceans, there would be only 5 things sitting in that raised plateau. But then I would have 5 little peaks that could come from that plateau. Or, as you'll see in a moment, we can actually correlate mental life with this proposal that the mind is an emergent property, is what the complex systems term would be, of energy flow, where energy flow is the movement along these probability axes. And I know this is weird, and some people take, we have an online training program, and you're welcome to come join us, but it takes a while to get this, but I wanted to get to the point for parenting right now. That if we look at this graph, assuming this is true, and in the developing mind, I say over and over again, this is taking the scientific findings from not only neuroscience, but from psychology, from anthropology, all these different fields we call interpersonal neurobiology, and then looking at the physics of energy with the proposal that mind is an emergent property of energy, which no one talks like that, but I talk like that. So this is going along that line, and it's saying this is an image of what the mind is. So if you get lost in a thought, for example, it would be a peak. Oh, my child should be great in soccer. They should be great in soccer. And the emotion that comes up here is, I feel so disappointed. All they want to do is draw pictures. Then you have a memory of yourself being a child, being a great soccer player or something. You'd be lost in all these peaks, right? But just beneath those peaks would be the thinking, emoting, and remembering that would give rise to those peaks. And maybe your state of mind would be one of disappointment. You really feel like your child has no good future because they're not playing soccer. They're just drawing pictures, you know? And so you say to little Pablo, Pablo, you should be playing soccer, not doing those stupid drawings. And your last name is Picasso, for example, and that would have an interesting outcome on the world, wouldn't it? But you can imagine then your state of mind, like I know what my kid is supposed to be, would be very different from here we're proposing from all these survey findings that awareness comes from the plane of possibility. It's where you drop into this spacious openness that we'll explore right now that you can get to in the hub of the wheel, basically. So here's the wheel of awareness again. And after doing this with so many people and getting people's reports, the ones who took the microphone or typed things up, what we found is this incredible possibility that the wheel is a practice for a child. It might be a drawing, let's just call it a visual image or a metaphor that we do, but it seems to correlate with the rim being like the plateaus and peaks and the hub being the plane of possibility. So this has led to incredible discussions with all sorts of folks, not just in the parenting world, but in the psychotherapy world, various forms of psychotherapy, including psychedelic use or the different treatments for trauma or depression, or looking at, spiritual practices or contemplative practices or indigenous teachings. These correlate with here I am on the unceded lands of the Tongva and the Chumash in Southern California. And there's something called indigeneity, which seems to correlate with this. The contemplative insights from all sorts of meditative practices. This simple drawing then also explains to us how we approach parenting. And so what I'm going to do now is get to the whole notion of how you can create clarity and calm using the 3-pillar practice, which are all in the wheel. So the research on 3 pillars is independent of the wheel. The wheel happens to have training within the single practice. Usually they're separate practices of focusing attention, opening awareness, and building kind intention. And one of the advanced practices you can do, or if you've been doing the wheel, you know it, is we bend the spoke around or pull the spoke back, and basically you get into the hub itself. So I want you, even if you've never done this practice, just to look at what some of the results are when people have done this. One thing for the initial 10,000 folks, but it was confirmed with the later 40,000 in the surveys, that no matter what the people's background were, wherever they were on the planet, whatever their religion was, their age, their gender, cultural backgrounds, meditation history, it didn't seem to change what the wheel experience was. They had a shift in relationship with others and the self. They reduced chaos and rigidity and moved toward that harmonious flow. But I want to focus on what that part was of getting into the hub. Over and over and over again. And my interns who come with me to these workshops, they said, "No, Dan, no one's going to believe you." And I said, "Yeah, but I'm recording all these things. So I've got the data." They would say things, the participants: clarity, joy, it was empty yet full, expansive, infinite, eternity, God, love, peace, a sense of belonging as a fundamental part of the whole, connected to others, the world, and the universe. Now, if you look at all the brain science and try to find why people would say these things in their subjective experience as they report them, you can't really find anything in the brain science. But if you look in the physics, you do find something, and that's what we've presented, that hub of the wheel correlates with the plane of possibility. People would say things like, when we got to the part when we turned the spoke all around, everything went quiet. It was just calm and quiet and peaceful and wonderful. This is from a person who had never meditated a day in her life before she did this. And then she goes on, this was literally, I recorded it and just typed it up. So this is literally word for word what she said. I didn't feel like I was here sitting on the chair. This is when she had bent the spoke around. I felt a lightness, a sort of like a light on the wall, reflected light on the wall from the window, a sense of fullness right out here. And she points away from the body. Really no story, no need to be anywhere, no time, a calm. How often do we get that? Well, if you do the wheel every day, you can get that every day. Just there in the moment, it was wonderful. Now, her report, as beautiful and articulate and elegant as it is not unusual. This happens over and over and over again. And I do the wheel every day. It doesn't always happen like that, but the more you do the practice and distinguish the hub from the rim, the more this calm, quiet, peaceful, wonderful space of awareness is available to you. This is the plane of possibility. So it looks like we can have our life, if you will, get all complicated, right? We can have these plateaus of being separate from the world, other plateaus on top of plateaus, worried about our kid. How can we guarantee something, this and that? And we can fall into a belief that being able to predict everything is the only guarantee of anything, when in fact it's not, but it's an understandable protective mechanism our mind has to try to get us from feeling helpless and hopeless. So we think, oh, if our child can get, all the right grades, or, get into the high scores, or get into the most elite college, everything's gonna be fine. Well, that's just not true. But they're numbers that we want for certainty. So when there were several suicides in the high school across from Stanford University, Palo Alto High School, and Pali High called me, the administrators, to go do an intervention. And I showed up a couple of months later when we could arrange time that they had, that I had. And I got there, 2 more kids in that high school, sadly, had killed themselves in the train going from San Francisco to San Jose. And the students who interviewed me, because I met with the students, I met with the parents, I met with the faculty and the administrators, the students made a video of that intervention, which I invite you to watch on our website. It's the Palo Alto and Gunn High School intervention that you can go to. I think it's actually, I don't know if it's Dr. Dan Siegel or Mindsight Institute. I can't remember where it is. But if you go to one of those websites, they're linked. Please watch that video, because I speak directly to the parents. You'll see the back of their heads, of everyone's heads. So it's all confidential, but you'll see me reach out to them about how to actually find the kind of calm and clarity that we need, and to awaken to this plane of possibility. Because when people do the wheel of awareness practice, this is the idea that as a, as a parent, you can learn to live from the plane. Doesn't mean getting lost in the plane or trying to just escape to the plane, or like you're disconnecting from reality. Quite the opposite. If you start doing the wheel of awareness practice, and you can come to our website and for free you do it. So this is just an invitation to you to take a 3-pillar practice that is, as the 3-pillar practice research shows, independent from the wheel, but the wheel has the 3 pillars. So it's likely going to do these things: reduces stress, improves your immune system, improves cardiovascular function, reduces inflammation, optimizes the enzyme telomerase. So all of that helps you slow the aging process and feel healthier. Not just feel healthier, be healthier. Be healthier, even in the face of VUCA times. Then it helps integrate your brain. Now, an integrated brain, we can go into details of that, but the bottom line of an integrated brain is that allows you to have a resilient mind. So what the wheel of awareness practice does, besides being a 3-pillar practice, is it invites you to live from the plane, meaning you become a lifelong learner. Because when you come out of your plateaus and access that plane, that's where all the other options are sitting. So you will find that learning from that allows you to have what's called a beginner's mind. So, the statement, the more you know, the less you see. Well, when you access that hub of the wheel, and the hub is the metaphor and the practice, The mechanism, we're saying, is the plane of possibility. When you begin to live from that, then you can learn from the plane, meaning all these other ways of experiencing life become available to you, become more mindful, you become more appreciative of differences, you allow yourself to enter this curious and accepting open state. So that's the learning part. The leaning from the plane, what that means is, as you're interacting with your child, to be specific about parenting, when you're doing some of the things Tina and I talked about in The Power of Showing Up, or when you're trying to explore the things Mary Hartzell and I talk about in Parenting from the Inside Out, or if you have an adolescent at home, if you read Brainstorm, when you're trying to do all these things to keep the lines of communication open, when you lean from the plane, what it means is you're coming from this place of openness. So rather than being lost on a plateau, which gets you all agitated and reactive and it's not going the way you think it should, and you find this incredible resource. And if you think about that word, means coming again and again and again. Source literally is the plane of possibility. It's the formless source of all form. That's a physics view. And, if you want just like a journey into all this stuff, the book Mind would be something for you to read. If you want to see how the wheel of awareness lets you live in these ways with all sorts of examples, the book Aware would be your way to do it. But as you do that, you can lean into it. This is just the way you come to life with this clarity and calm. The longing from the plane of possibility is fascinating. And this next book, Interconnected, goes into that. So I won't do a lot of detail here. And actually another book I'm writing with 4 other colleagues called Wholeness is about this. But for 2 big reasons, there's probably a longing we all have for wholeness, WHOLE, wholeness. And one of those reasons is called implicit memory, that we're in the womb and you have this feeling of being connected to the uterus. You're literally at one with the uterus. And that's embedded in memory, called implicit memory. And then you're extruded, no matter how you're born, cesarean section, vaginal birth, you are extruded out into the world of bright lights, cold air, slap on the butt. And now you get hungry no matter how great your parents are. And so there's a longing to go back to the womb, to be at one with the womb, right? So that's one reason we have a longing for wholeness. And another reason is that, if you think about the movement from possibility to actuality, in many ways, it explains the 13 plus billion years of the universe existing from the Big Bang, where everything starts from a wholeness that then, as energy manifests into its different forms, including matter, by the way, as you know from Einstein, E energy equals mass times speed of light squared, meaning mass is condensed energy. So all these possibilities that existed now get condensed as matter that we call the universe. So there's a longing for a wholeness that might even go back that far. Either way, implicit memory for the time in the womb, or the fact that we all come from the plane of possibility, there's a longing to come back. And when you open to that, you can feel how life, when it feels most challenging, is often the sense of disconnection from that wholeness. And we have different ways that we each process that based on our temperament, based on our attachment. That's what this book Wholeness is about. But to say it really simply, 3 fundamental subcortical networks probably are the biggest ones, and I'll just name them here briefly. Sadness, when we feel disconnection, so it's a drive to connect. Anger, when we feel something is wrong that needs to be corrected. So anger, sadness, anger, and fear, when we feel threatened. So it's a drive to protect or be protected. So protect, correct, and connect. That's how my mind remembers those. that longing then for wholeness can come out in these ways. And, you may find that sadness or fear or anger are dominant in your life. For some people, it's two. For very rarely, it's all three. But becoming whole means kind of embracing the meaning beneath these subcortical drives, we think, for the longing for wholeness to be satisfied. And then the last three, laughing, loving, and leading. Laughing is the idea that no matter how challenging things get, bringing a sense of humor and joy is so important. And there's a beautiful book called The Book of Joy by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Father Desmond Tutu, who just passed away, and Doug Abrams. And there's an opportunity to actually see in that book what I once learned from His Holiness the Dalai Lama when I was teaching at a workshop where he was the main speaker at the keynote. And someone asked him, what's wrong with you that you can laugh so much when there's so much suffering? And he said something that really was profound. He said, it's not in spite of the suffering that I laugh and am filled with joy. It's actually because of it. Because if I let the laughter go, the suffering will have won. So while we read the newspaper, we can feel this heaviness. It's so important to keep our joy and humor very much alive. Loving is the notion, amazingly, that in that plane of possibility, when people have done the wheel of awareness and get in the hub, the word love is the most common word that's used. So this is kind of an amazing finding, that love seems to be one of the threads of the tapestry of reality. Now, love seems very much connected to linking. And so we come back to our linking of differentiated parts. So when you love someone or something, you're differentiating from it and linking to it. Now, I say the love part because, parenting can be challenging, but when you tap back into that source, that resource of love in the plane of possibility, then it fuels your parenting, because before, what you may have felt like, oh, parenting is overwhelming, this is terrible, you come back to the source of the love for your child. And it is a literally never-ending source of love for you to tap into, even when the details can be difficult. And then finally, leading, in many ways, there's something called pervasive leadership. In many ways, what we do as parents is we take on the role of a leader. Now, what is a leader? A leader is someone who is able to provide guidance or instruction for helping others find their own strengths, right? So it's not really power over, it's the idea of power with. The notion that we are going to help empower our children to find their own gifts, as Robin Wall Kimmerer beautifully describes in her really amazing book, Braiding Sweetgrass. From the Potawatomi people from which she comes, the indigenous people of the Midwest, what their goal is to really say, people can find what their own unique, differentiated in our terms, gifts are in the world and develop those. So part of what we do as parents is do exactly what indigenous teachings say, is to help our child find their own unique gifts and support them in becoming themselves, really. And realizing, like we now, I think, are facing in the book, intra-connected, not interconnected, which whenever I type this new word, intra-connected, into my word processor, so I'm finishing the book, it changes it to interconnected. So I have to tell it, no, I mean intra-connected, meaning there is a wholeness to life, and that we're not just separate parts connected to each other, but that we are actually fundamental to the fabric of the whole. And I think part of what the pervasive leadership that we need on the planet now is for us as parents to see beyond just what modern society has told us of the self being in the body and the self being separate, the solo self, and to empower children to realize, yes, they have an inner self that they need to know and cultivate in an integrated way as a me, but they are also a we. They're also a relationship with other people and with nature. So to integrate those two, we differentiate them, me and we, and then we bring them together in kind of a funny term, but it's a very useful term, MWE, MWE. And that's the kind of leading, I think, when we see through all the challenges of social injustice, of the climate crisis that we are in, of the polarization we're facing, of even the viral pandemic and the way people haven't been working together. All those and more can be related to, including the way our attention is going to these digital objects, to this separation. This view of a separate self, this solo self, is in itself a kind of pandemic. And so you as a parent can be empowered by helping your child, by leading them, by empowering them to realize that they are not just, in terms of their identity and their belonging, in terms of their self, they're not just in their body. That is a false concept that leads to a separation that is very harmful. Harmful in part because it's just not true, but harmful in other ways because it's not integrated. And so we have a chance to bring an integrated identity and belonging to allow the self of our child to experience what it's like to know their inner world as a me, to realize the connected nature of our relational lives as a we, and then to come to live in an integrated, intra-connected way as a we. So we thanks you very much for all of your presence here. I hope this has been at least understandable, because we covered a huge amount in a small amount of time. And I hope what you'll do is try on the Wheel of Awareness practice to get all the personal benefits for your well-being, to gain clarity and calm and physiological health for your body, but then be able to live from the plane and provide these all these ways of integrating our lives and guiding your children toward well-being. So thank you so much for being here and being interested in how to improve your parenting in these challenging times.
Dan, first of all, thank you so much. I want to just quickly, a couple things. One, we're going to put up a poll just for people to respond, so it gives us a little information on where they're coming from. And while they're answering that, there are a gazillion questions, but we're at time, but I'm just going to ask you one. There's a profound amount of complexity in people's lives, and there's many questions asking, should this be something you do on your own? Should this be the Wheel of Awareness? Should this be something that you try to do with your children? And let's just go with that one.
Well, I would say that I would start with yourself for sure, because all sorts of stuff can come up that might be confusing. And this is true of the teacher as well as a parent. So I would definitely start it on your own, or you can do it with, other parents. I wouldn't start it with your kids by yourself. I would definitely get used to it, because there's a shift, especially when you get in the hub, that I think is magnificent, but for some people can be like, whoa, because time disappears and you enter what physicists, I think you're entering what physicists call another realm of reality. So you need to kind of work with that and get familiar with that. So I would do it on your own first. And that's why the Becoming Aware book might be the best. It's a 21-day program to do just that. So that way, if your child, however old they are, it does it with you then, and they do have this shift into this timeless realm, you know what it feels like, and you're not going, God, I don't know what that is, or, and especially if you read about this stuff, which would be an Aware, not the Becoming Aware book, because the Becoming Aware is just the practice. Then the Aware book gives you examples. Even there's a parenting example in there. I would definitely get familiar with it as a parent individual or as a parent group. You could certainly do it in support groups of parents, but I would do that before you do it with your kids.
Great. I'm tempted to squeeze more in, but you've been generous with your time, and everyone who is on, they will get the resources and a link so they'll be able to review everything. And just thank you so much for your time and your wisdom.
My pleasure. Great to see you, Elaine. And, if people want to learn more, I mean, obviously ParentMap has got a bunch of stuff. If you want the slides or want to do the wheel, please come to our website or contact Christy at mindsightinstitute.com. And we're happy to be supportive of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great to see you.
Bye.
Be well. Thanks, everyone.